So for this week on CyberSchool, we're going to be covering RFID access control and specifically how to set up these products. We've talked at length about our different options for access control, including our RFID units, but never really got into the specifics of how you actually go and set up users and how you actually program the cards. That's what we'll go through today. So first and foremost, what is RFID access control? And basically all that is it's just access control that instead of using, say, like a key, like everybody normally would, say, for like your home or anything like that, you're using an RFID card or a fob instead of that key. And RFID just stands for radio frequency identification. With our cards, they're close read cards, so you actually do have to hold them physically up against the reader, not kind of like the cool RFID cards that say, or other RFID technology that you can encounter in, say, like big box stores, where, you know, you're walking through, you know, those kind of like columns as you go out the door, and those are just looking for RFID tags, and they'll beep and let security know that you forgot to scan something. Not that you're stealing, you forgot to scan something, and, you know, you haven't deactivated the card. But, you know, we interact with it all the time, and our products use the close read technology. So you actually have to get really close to the reader. We recommend physically holding your card or your fob actually up against the reader to get a good, clean read with it. Our products are available, of course, in an intercom option. That's typically what we recommend when we're recommending these products, just because if this unit is going to be used in a location where the entranceway would be used by employees, but you could have patrons or clientele to the particular business using that particular door, a standalone RFID reader that all you can do is read an RFID card is really no good if you don't have one of those cards. So we really recommend going for an intercom option just to be able to supplement that. But of course, if you've got, say, a employee parking area where you won't have patrons or clients actually using the doorways or the entranceways in that area, a standalone single RFID unit is very applicable for that area. No sense spending the extra money for that intercom functionality if you don't need it. So the products that we have and that we'll be covering today are as follows: our RFID Secure Access Control Endpoint, part number 011425, pictured there in the bottom left. We've got the RFID Keypad Secure Access Control Endpoint, part number 011426, in the middle left side there, of course, with the RFID and the keypad there. We've got our SIP Outdoor Intercom with RFID, part number 011477, the middle right. And then SIP H264 Video Outdoor Intercom with RFID, part number 011478, the rightmost picture there. So as you can tell, we've got a big variety of intercoms that you can use for RFID access control. So to talk about the whole kind of setup process as you're going through and setting up these, and for the purpose of today's video, we'll be dealing strictly with actually setting up the cards and that type of a functionality. We won't be going over, say, setting up SIP registration or multicast capability. We're really going to be strictly looking at things to deal with the RFID cards. Things like setting up the SIP functionality is something that would be shared across all other products, and we really want to focus on the RFID portion of setup. So to actually set up the system, you of course need to set a passphrase. Then if you have your passphrase created, you need to add the user info for all of the particular users that you're going to create. And this would be done on a per user basis. So you would add a user with all of their info, their name, when their card is going to be valid. Then of course you program the card, and you would repeat that process for all of the users of this particular device. And then when you're done with that, you want to, of course, set your relay settings for the unit to determine which relay it's going to toggle. If it's going to toggle its onboard relay, meaning that it's going to trigger its normally open, temporarily closed relay to complete the circuit, and then whatever it is connected to can take an action. Or if you're using one of our door strike accessory products, it can trigger that and then trigger whatever that is connected to, as well as the buzzer capability on there. So if you're dealing with our standalone RFID units, it's a little physical buzzing unit, since those units don't have an intercom, like a physical speaker, whereas our intercom-based units, since they have a physical speaker, they will actually play a buzz tone from the speaker instead of using a separate buzzer unit. And then there's also the sensor capability that these products have to deal with the optional sensor input of the intercom to be able to tell if a door was actually closed. And that's kind of the process overview in general. So as we go through, let's kind of talk about each individual step, and we'll start with the RFID passphrase. And that's kind of like a key term, like what is a passphrase? What does this mean? And the RFID passphrase is what's known as a seed for the RFID encryption. Basically, it takes this and then uses other factors such as time and a couple other factors to actually go and create a random number that's going to be used by the card. Because at the end of the day, every RFID card, whether it's ours or a competitor's or anything like that, basically when you scan the card, the reader is just picking up a series of numbers on that card. It could be numbers and letters. It's reading a string of data, just a string of characters. And in our case, it's just reading a string of numbers. And the passphrase helps create randomness when it's creating those numbers. And that's strictly what that's for. The passphrase is very important because it's used in actually creating the number on the card. So it's also necessarily not only to write the cards, but it's useful to read the cards. So for example, just for conversational sake, say that the passphrase is set to CyberData, very easy. And then say you've got another reader that somebody else sets up a year or two later and they call it Cyber-Data or Cyber123 data or something like that. But that would be a different passphrase, and cards created with a passphrase of CyberData would not work with the Cyber123 data or something like that. If the passphrases are different, the cards will not work between different endpoints because that passphrase is, again, necessary for writing the cards, creating that random number, but then also reading that random number off the card. So it's very, very important to retain this passphrase. So we really recommend write down that passphrase after you go and set it up. Typically it's not good to write down your passwords or anything like that, but for something like this, since it's not a login credential, this is something that we would recommend, writing down and, giving to your, say, human resources person, and they can keep it in their safe, or they keep all the credit cards and all those, really important business-related information, just so that way, in the event of a failure, say your unit gets destroyed and you went out and you bought, 150 cards, and you don't want to have to go and reprogram the cards and reissue a whole bunch of cards because you lost that passphrase, you'd be real happy that you had that backup somewhere. So we really, really recommend retaining that passphrase somewhere, whether or not you write it down somewhere and you physically store that, on, say, a piece of paper, or you put that in a file and you store it in, an offsite cloud storage. There's lots of places that you could actually store the passphrase, but we really do recommend actually storing that somewhere. So of course you have to go and set the passphrase when you initially set up the unit, and you do that after, typing it in there, as you can see in the screenshot here. You can view it if you click that little show button that I have highlighted there in a yellow box that will, kind of like a password, if you're setting a password on a website, it will actually show you the text of what you typed in there, just to make sure, one, that you typed in what you wanted, and then two, you can potentially write it down and just be able to view it there. This particular field allows for numbers, letters, spaces. It's not, say, like a password where you could be limited to, say, just upper and lowercase letters and maybe numbers, or, say, special characters as well. You know how, like, when you create a password, you need to have an uppercase letter and then like a couple numbers and a hyphen or an exclamation point or special characters. That's all kind of recommended when you're setting one of these. And the best rule of thumb when you're creating a passphrase for this type of a sense is the longer the passphrase just means stronger encryption, because it provides the capability to create a longer, better option for that seed generation. And it really doesn't matter, say, like, literally the, just punching in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 would be the same as typing in a 9-letter word. The characters that you're pressing are not important. It's the length that's the most important. Of course, you wouldn't at that point just want to go and just press a single key a whole bunch of times, set it to 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 or something, because that wouldn't be particularly random. But if they're different digits at a longer length, it's just as good as, say, a really complex uppercase, lowercase, and a mix of everything. You want just a long password. I typically recommend for things like this is like a sentence or something that's relatively long, so it gets you that good capability in there for that random generation. So after you go and create your passphrase, then you need to deal with your access lists because you've basically got the unit prepared to start adding users and start programming cards. So we need to get into the access list portion of it. And the access list is the list of 500 users that each individual endpoint supports. All of our endpoints, whether it's the standalone RFID secure access control endpoint or one of the video options, the audio only or the video option, all support 500 users. And this list is not dynamically created, meaning that, say, it would only start as one, and then after you add one, you can add the second one, and then the third one, where the list grows as you create users. We have a predetermined list that has up to 500 users. And for creation purposes, it's not particularly important, but when you're dealing with management later, and you'll see that in a couple images, it can create a little some visual hurdles. It's not really a problem when you're actually creating the access list, but it's not what some people would expect when they're creating a list like this, where it would be dynamically generated. Meaning, say, for example, if you add user number 1, then user number 2 would appear, and you could add that second user. And vice versa. Say you have 3 users, and you delete user 2, user 3 does not automatically become user 2 because user 2 is deleted. User 3, once created at user level, user number 3 will always be user number 3. So that's just some of the distinctions and things to understand when you're looking at the access list and planning out where the users will reside on this particular list. There's no difference in functionality between user 1, user 2, and user 500. There is no functional difference besides where they appear in the actual access list. The nice thing with this list is, of course, after you go and you spend all the time at one particular reader setting up all these different users, say, you go through and you create 50 cards, you're setting up a whole bunch of people, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I have 3 readers, this is going to be a burden, I have to do that on 3 different units, that's kind of tough. Well, actually, no. You can export the access list with that nice little export access list right there on the top, and then you can import that exported access list into all of your other devices. So you really only have to set this up once on one unit, and then you basically just export that and load it onto different units, which is one of the reasons that we recommend having a more administration style unit, something that, if you're going to be opting to using our RFID access control system, it would be very beneficial if you're going to have multiple readers in multiple locations to have an administrative unit, so that way you don't have to have a computer by a door when you're trying to set it up. Okay, scan the card and, have a helper to do it. You can just, give one of these to your HR personnel, and as needed, they can go through and create everything at their own desk. Very streamlined, very easy to work with. So that's kind of the access list in general. Again, it's a list of 500 users. It's not dynamically created, meaning user 3 will always be user 3, even if user 1 and user 2 do not exist. So now that we've kind of covered adding a passphrase, what the passphrase is, what the user list is, let's actually talk about creating a user here. So when you go and you create a user, you click on that add button list that we saw in the previous image, where on the particular columns there was an add button to create a user. And when you click add, you get a nice little pop-up like I have shown here on the right-hand side that would just be configure access record for number and then whichever number of the user that you're particularly using. And I always recommend setting the name for the particular user, and I would recommend a full first and last name. Here in the image, I've only just got my first name listed there, of course, just Paul, but I would definitely recommend putting a first and last name there just because it can help in the future, or especially if by chance maybe you hire another Paul at the company, it can get a little confusing. And at that point, I would also recommend maybe not potentially doing, say, first name and last initial, because that can also be confusing, like we have at CyberData, where we have 2 Paul T's. So thankfully, the access record that I'm creating here is not for use at CyberData. This is just for illustrative purposes. If this was actually going to go at CyberData, it would read my full first and last name there. But next, as we move forward, you, of course, don't need to set anything for the field there, tag UID, which is just the tag user ID. That'll be set when you actually enroll the tag. So the next field that you'll need to configure is the valid from and the valid to time. And these are the valid times that you'll set for basically when the card will work and when the card will not work. Very self-explanatory. And the fields that you can set there are, of course, say if you want it to work on a particular day of the week, you use the 3-letter abbreviations, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday through Sunday, that typical 3-letter abbreviation that everybody is used to, or weekday, WDY, or weekend, WND. And that allows you the capability to go and say limit the access only between certain times on a weekday to a weekend. As an example, with what I have configured here, it's set to weekday, WDY, from 7 a.m. Of course, it's measured in 24-hour time. So from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. So that way my card will work starting at 7 a.m. and will stop working at 6:01 p.m. And only on weekdays. For example, say if you set it for Monday at 6 and then starting from Monday at 6 and then valid to Friday at 7 p.m. That would give all of that capability starting at Monday at 6 a.m. through Friday at 6 p.m. that my card would be active. So I could come back at Tuesday at 1 o'clock in the morning and my card would still work depending on how you set it up. It gives you that capability and that granularity. For example, say if you've got people that would say only be active in night hours or only be active on say a couple days, like for example at CyberData right now we're doing split shifts for our production crew, so we've only got some production crew coming in some days of the week. You could set up their cards so that way their cards could only work on certain days of the week. And of course you wouldn't want to use a weekday abbreviation, WDY, for people that would not be coming in on say Thursday, Friday. They only work Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So you've got that capability to be able to set which particular days that they can work. You can also set it to all, so the card will always work no matter what. That could be useful for, say, your CEOs, your boss people that need to be able to get into the building whenever, or say like janitors or anything like that. You've got a lot of capability and flexibility when you're setting these valid to and valid from times. Again, and everything needs to be in the 24-hour format when you're setting that, just because it makes it a little bit less confusing than having to remember AM and PM on all of the valid from and valid to times. And then finally, now that you've created that's the majority of the work as you're going through and setting up that particular user. Finally, you need to press the Enroll Tag button there. And then you'll see under the current status section, I don't have it illustrated here because it's not showing a video, but when you click the Enroll Tag button, under current status, it will say waiting for RFID tag like you see there, and you could scan the tag and it will read the tag and then actually program the tag, and it will populate it with a user ID. It will change in that current status to list the tag UID, that tag user ID, and auto-populate that tag UID field. So basically you just set the name of the user and the valid to and valid from time, and then press the enroll tag and scan your tag, and you've created a user. And at that point you just hit save changes. So you'll continue to repeat this process as you go through all the additional users as you're setting everybody up here. And then as you can see on our access list on the right-hand side, you can see some good examples of different ways that you can set up cards. For example, Paul at number 1, his card is active and working between Monday at 7 a.m. through Wednesday at 6 p.m. So my card would work starting at Monday at 7 a.m. and would work through Wednesday at 6 p.m. So again, like I said on the prior slide, I could come in at Tuesday at 1 o'clock in the morning and that card would work. But starting Wednesday at 6:01 p.m., that card would not work until Monday at 7 a.m. the following week. So it has that kind of capability and that control. And then a good counterpoint to that would be Cole, line number 2 there. Cole's tag is always available. That thing will always work. So Cole can come into the building anytime, whenever. Not say only Monday through Friday. His card literally is valid all the time. Kevin is a great counterpart there, where Kevin's card starts working on, on weekdays starting at 8 a.m. and stops working on weekdays at at 5 p.m. So that way it gives Kevin that capability to come in during regular business hours, but right after regular business hours, his card stops working and he's not allowed to come back into the building until 8 in the morning. Then on line number 4, you'll see another feature that we have here that I'll talk in a little bit more depth, which is our blacklisted capability. Phil there is blacklisted, and his card will give a particular response when that card is scanned. We'll cover that in more depth, but this gives you kind of an idea of what the access list will look like when it's populated, as well as different ways that the unit will, or different styles in how you can set the valid to and the valid from time. So as I was saying, you go through and you repeat this process of just adding your user, first name, last name, and then your valid from and valid to time, and scanning all your cards. And when you're going through and you're creating all these cards for different people, have some kind of organization on your desk, or have, a line of people as you're going through and creating these, so that way you don't get the cards mixed up. Our cards aren't marked on the exterior, nor are the key fobs, so there's no identification. Say if you're just scanning a card and you're putting it into a pile, boy, I hope you paid attention to the order you put them in that pile, because there's no notes or no marks on the cards to be able to identify one card from the other unless you do that. So really organize your system as you're going through and setting up all these different cards so they don't get mixed up. It might be good to just say have people come to your human resources officer, and as they go and they create these users, they add them individually whenever they show up in the office, and they get handed the card immediately. So that way the human resources person doesn't have to hold on to those cards and potentially mix them up and give Cole my card that would only work Monday through Wednesday, and I get Cole's card that works all the time. You wouldn't want one of those potential security vulnerabilities to arise. So you really want to make sure you manage and really control the process of just creating and organizing the cards you do it. And of course, different users can have different valid to and valid from times. These are all unique per the individual user, like you can see on the right-hand side, where some of us, myself included, are limited, whereas, people like Tober or Mauricio can use their cards whenever they want. They can come and go as they please. And as you go through and you create these levels, one, we really recommend when you're finished is export the access list, so that way you've got a backup of it. Just like you want to export and retain that passphrase, you spend a lot of time going through and programming all these cards and getting them all ready to work, especially, only illustrating 7 here. That doesn't take too long, but if you're creating, 30, 40, 50 cards, what have you, even upwards of 500, that's a decent amount of time, and it would be really helpful to not have to do that again. So we really recommend exporting your access list. But when you export your access list, I'd recommend calling that your general access list. When you're creating all of these different user levels, you want to go and basically start with your general acceptance. Basically, think of like your front door key to a business. You might give all of your regular employees a key to the front door, so that way they can come in and go when they want. Most businesses probably don't do that, but that's just the reasoning and thinking that we'll think about when we're doing this. And you might restrict access to certain parts of the building by, say, issuing a different key to that location. And you can do the exact same thing with our units, but you want to start from that base access list, so that way you don't have to make yourself more work. And we'll explain that a little bit later as we go. But think of this initial list that we just created, my list of 7 users here, as your general access list. Everybody can get through the front door. Not everybody can get into the storeroom is a great way to think about it. So before we get into too much about, getting into the weeds and talking about a lot of the other settings and capabilities, let's talk about some of the other specific settings that you can set that coincide with all of these access list settings. So the relay settings are arguably probably the most important settings that you want to set on this thing, and that's what the unit does when you go and you scan your card, and your card's supposed to work. Because it's all well and good if you've got a card reader that you scan it and the light turns green and that's all that happens. Then you just spent all this money on a unit that basically doesn't do anything. You want it to activate that relay, so then it interacts with that door strike or that gate controller and lets people get access. Again, this is an RFID access control system. If they scan their card and they can't get access, the thing's not doing what it's designed to do and what you've spent all this money to do it on. So the relay settings are arguably the most important part of the settings on here. And there's basically two different relays that the unit can actuate when a valid card is scanned. It can, of course, activate the onboard relay, that first setting that we have checked there. Activate relay on valid RFID, which means when a valid RFID card is scanned, meaning that it is both a non-blacklisted card and it is scanned in a valid time frame. So say I scanned my card at 8 a.m. on Monday morning, my card would be valid. Therefore, it would trigger the onboard relay of the RFID reader and I could get through that front door. But say, for example, we were using that door strike relay, the network dual door strike relay. You would want it to not activate the onboard relay of the intercom because we're not using that relay. We're using the door strike relay, that DSR relay. So you would want to check the second box there, activate DSR on valid RFID, which basically, instead of just triggering that onboard relay, triggers the remote relay. Then finally, we've got the relay timeout settings, which applies to both the DSR relay and the onboard relay. And that's just how long that relay will trigger. Because remember, these are a temporary trigger. It's not an indefinite trigger and then only untrigger when a different card is scanned. This is one that will, you scan it and it will be active. The relay will engage for 6 seconds based on this configuration. That's usually what I recommend for front door or just general door access, because it gives people that capability if they're coming to, I mean, not as many people do this now because nobody's going to work, nobody's actually going to work anymore. We're still working, just not at the building. Where you might be coming in and you've got, a couple, a whole bunch of papers, you've got maybe a lunch and a coffee in one hand, you're kind of juggling things. Maybe you got an umbrella because, you're getting snowed on or it's raining. So you've got that capability and that little bit of extra time to kind of shuffle stuff around and then get the door open. 2 seconds is just way too short. Then in our second section here, we've got the buzzer settings. And the buzzer settings are basically the buzzer or the tone that'll play when either the relay is active or a rejected card was read. I recommend only having this activate when the buzzer activate when the relay is active, because it's through different TV and media and everything that people have consumed, at least here in the States, we all kind of expect when you get buzzed in, there's a literal buzzing sound that'll come from the intercom. We all have those ideas of those Hollywood movies where, they're talking to somebody at their apartment in Brooklyn and they're downstairs and, oh, buzz me in. And, they're sitting there and they're trying to buzz them in and then it's not working. And, they have that jag, I'm buzzing you in, and I'm pulling on the door's not opening. We're all expecting that buzz tone when, somebody gets buzzed in or they scan their card and it works, that you're hearing some kind of a tone that lets you know that, okay, I can open the door now. Everybody just kind of expects that. And it's a really cool, easy feature to work with. So if you want that kind of a capability, you would check that first box there for buzz while relay active, which will then just play a buzz tone that will play depending on either the onboard relay or that DSR relay are engaged, and the tone will play based on the relay timeout settings from those relay settings up above. So both of these two groups of settings really coincide and really play together. And finally, we've got the sensor settings down at the bottom of this section. The sensor settings are completely optional. You don't have to use these. Frankly, not a lot of people use it. They should use it because it's a really nice feature, especially when you're dealing with access control. And what this does is it utilizes either two of the contact points on a screw down terminal or on the screw down terminal of the door strike that they're connected to. That gives you the capability of using a magnetic door sensor. So that way when a door has actually been closed, which is important. If you want to make sure only certain people get through that door, you want to make sure that door closes, and you want to be able to maintain that. So this gives you the capability to do that, where the unit can just simply buzz if the timeout has been reached where the door is still open. But typically we recommend have it go and actually take more options. And you can further define that on the sensor tab on our web interface. We won't go into that today because we're specifically dealing with these particular features, but you can have it buzz based on the timeout and you can have it take further actions on an additional page. But these are three of the main settings that kind of coincide when you're using the RFID tag readers. So next, one that I wanted to cover in a lot more emphasis is the blacklist feature that we have. And this is a really important feature when you're dealing with RFID tags or key fobs or basically this type of access control. It's very, very important because you need to be able to do something when, say, a card gets stolen or a card is lost. Of course, at the base level, if you think back and let's pull RFID out of the scenario and let's just think, the physical key ring that all of us have. Everybody just uses a regular key for your front door. If you lose your key, your option is either taking one of, maybe your backup house keys that you have and taking it to a locksmith, taking it to, your local hardware store and having them make you a new key. That's a new option, but then you never know what happened to that key that I lost or what happened to that key that got stolen. Is it out there? Could somebody, potentially use that key to get in? The real other option is just going and, calling a locksmith and having them rekey your whole system so that key doesn't work. And the same kind of idea works as we pull it back to RFID tag readers. So when you're dealing with an RFID tag reader and say that RFID card or that key fob gets lost or stolen, you can, of course, just delete the card, kind of like, say, rekeying your home lock, and it won't work. End all be all, if that's the point that you want to get to, you can just delete that user, and then when they scan the card, you won't know the card won't work because it's not listed in the system. They don't gain access, and done deal. They didn't gain access. That card is junk. But wouldn't it be nice in a scenario like that to know if somebody tried to use one of those stolen cards or that lost card? Say, you're out, you're at a trade show or something that's, happens to be in town, and, you're out whining and dining people, and you happen to leave your RFID card at the restaurant, and somebody, tries to gain access to the building. It sure would be nice to know that somebody tried to gain access to the building with that particular card at, say, 1 o'clock in the morning. You'd probably want to know that, and that's where the blacklist action comes in, where when that card gets lost, instead of, say, just deleting the card so the card doesn't work, you can set it as a blacklisted user, which is how we saw in a couple slides back. That's how Phil was set. And when the blacklisted card is scanned, the device can take a couple different actions based on your configuration. It can send a call discreetly, so if you check the box to play message to SIP extension, and you check that box, and then you set the SIP extension, that's the number that will call, and then the SIP ID, it will basically be your caller ID. As you can see, the SIP extension is 666, and it's going to appear as extension 666. And that's just how we would just recommend that you set that to whoever should receive that call. Say, it could be a secretary, it could be a ring group of multiple people, it could be an outside, security company, what have you. It can go to, you basically just put in a number that you want it to call. And that's a really good discrete option where, say that, that would be, robber would come up and scan that card and the card won't work. And, they just get a little red blinky light that tells them, okay, the card doesn't work. And they're kind of sitting there frustrated. Well, little unbeknownst to them, they have no idea that this will happen. The device will actually go and make a call to that number that you set and play a particular message. And it'll tell them if you just use the default code or the default audio file, it will just say blacklisted code entered or blacklisted card entered at that particular. It won't tell you the location, but it'll say just a blacklisted code entered. And based on that SIP ID, that basically the caller ID of how the device will appear there, it can give them particular information to where the where this happens. So that's a really great option if you want to be a little bit more discreet about this blacklisted card getting scanned. You can also let everybody know by using the multicast capability. So in that same sense of sending a SIP call, the device can send multicast. And to send multicast, it's going to use, of course, a multicast address and port. And what we have listed there for the multicast address is just the address 234.6.6.6 at port 666. And what that'll do is we'll just send that same message that would have been sent via SIP call via multicast, and that can get picked up by, say, your SIP paging adapter that's connected to your analog amplifier, or say if you've got a more modern system, it could go to all of, say, your CyberData overhead speakers or your IP66 horns. You know, you can really get that broadcast out so that everybody knows that a blacklisted card was entered somewhere. And that can be a real deterrent to somebody that would be trying to rob the place. They go up and they scan that card thinking, okay, I'm going to get in, I'm going to steal some computers, or I'm going to rip the copper out of the walls and sell that for scrap. They go and scan the card, and it sends out this big message, blacklisted card entered at, you know, West Gate number 3, and then they're going to get the heck out of Dodge because there was just this big announcement that somebody used a card that they weren't supposed to use. So that can be a really big deterrent just based on them scanning that card, and then they'll get the heck out of the Dodge. The business didn't lose their computers. They didn't get all the copper wire stolen out of their walls. So it's a really great option there. And you don't have to just pick one or the other. You can do them both simultaneously and really get that message out. You can send out that initial multicast message so you get that quick, immediate deterrent. It kind of scares off the person, and then it can make that call to, say, the security company, and the security guy can, you know, walk out of his shack and jump in his golf cart and putt around and, you know, look for somebody that might not supposed to be at the location. So you've got a lot of capabilities for actions that device can take when you scan one of those blacklisted cards, and it's really a feature that we recommend you take advantage of when you're implementing one of these devices. So now that we've kind of covered the general use for these units, when you would go and implement it, say, for just, say, a single door or maybe 1 or 2 doors, when you're thinking about using one of these things, you can really step up the potential complexity when you're dealing with multiple access tiers. And when I say multiple access tiers, it's kind of how I was talking about how after we finished creating the access list, that list of 7 users that I had, that general access list, which would be, you know, what I have illustrated down here in blue on the right-hand side, which would just be your general users. Everybody that has a card can get in the business, but not everybody can scan a card and get into the orange storeroom up there in the top half of the floor plan to be able to get into where all that equipment is stored. So you could use the same cards for the front door and the high security storage area, but only certain cards will work for that high security storage area. So it gives that kind of scenario that you can use this RFID access control for multiple locations in a particular business, all with only issuing a single card to all your users, which is ideal. You wouldn't want to have them manage multiple cards. That just gets confusing for them and confusing for you. So ideally, you want them to be able to use just that single card. And if you set it up like we'll talk about here, everybody can do that, where all the cards will work for the front access to the building, but only some of the cards will work for the higher security storage area. It's really useful not only, of course, for storage areas. That's just what we'll demonstrate today, but you could use it for, say, server rooms or places with high value equipment, or even out on the production floor, or just kind of limiting people from getting to certain areas, or even, say, like executive bathrooms for places that have that. You know, they've got the really nice bathrooms over there for the, you know, all the C-level employees, and you know, all the regular people can go use the other bathroom that doesn't have that really nice toilet paper in it. You know, it can be limited for anything like that. Again, using that same RFID card for it. So the way that you'll go and set this up is you'll want to create a different access list. And the easiest way to do this is take that list, that general access list that you backed up in that prior step, where you had the list of all the people that can come in through that front door, and you would load that onto your higher security unit, and then you would delete the users that don't need access through there. So, for example, taking the same access list that we created for that prior step, my list, you know, 1 through 7, Paul, John, Kevin, Cole, Phil, Tober, and Mauricio, to give all those people access, you initially load that on there, and then you delete the users that don't need access. So the people that don't need access to the storeroom in our hypothetical situation here would be Paul, Kevin, and John. Cole, Phil, Tober, and Mauricio can all use their cards to get into this secure storeroom, but the other users can't. And the easiest way to do this, instead of going and recreating all these cards, is again just loading in that general access user and then that general access list, and then deleting the users that should not get access to this particular doorway, again just by clicking that delete button. And then after you go and you set it up with all of the people that you want them added in here, you can go and restrict, say, their time. So for example, we could change Cole, as you can see here, where Cole was normally active in our last illustration. His card was active all the time. Cole could come in whenever he wanted. Well, now to get into this secondary room, he can only use that during weekend or weekdays. He can't come in on the weekend and still get into these storerooms. Whereas Phil is still, he's able to get in there all the time, although he's not blacklisted because that was going to be his birthday. So we all wanted to know when he tried to come through the door. But to get into the storeroom, he can do that discreetly. So it gives you the capability to go and create these different tier lists. And the easiest way to do it, again, is to just take that general access list, that base access list that everybody can use, and restrict the access from that list instead of creating a new access list from the ground up. Why do more work if you don't have to? So now that we've kind of talked about that, creating multiple lists, how do you go and manage these things? After you go and you get them set up, it can be quite burdensome to go and say manage a whole bunch of them. And there's really two main ways that you can go and manage these units. You can, of course, manage them manually, meaning that you have to log into each endpoint, each reader manually, and say add or delete users, physically through one of those. I would recommend doing it on one and then exporting the list and importing that on others, just so that way you don't have to go through and remember, okay, I deleted this user, and this user from all three units, and I changed the time for this other user on all three units. You can just do it on one and then export that to all of the other readers, assuming that they're all on that same privilege level. And that's really okay for, say, 1 to 3 units. If you're not doing a whole bunch, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're dealing with, a handful of units, say 3 or more, you might want to consider using auto provisioning. And auto provisioning is a subject that we cover in a lot more depth in another CyberSchool. We'll have that link in the description below. But we would really recommend checking that out. And this is a really easy feature to go and implement when you're managing multiple units there. And the way to do that is by basically creating that access list as you go through and set it up, and then say if you need any different security tiers, say your general access list for your front door, and then a different access list for your storage room, and you would create those as files and you would store them on a server. And this server could be, say, local on the premises. It could be hosted in the cloud. That part is up to you. But you can host these files on that particular server, and then when the devices boot up based on how you have them configured for auto provisioning, they can grab this file and automatically download it and set themselves. So for example, say you're trying to manage stuff and you have to delete a user and change the active time for that. You do it on your administrative unit, you export that list, and you throw it on your auto provisioning server, and the devices, depending on how they're configured, will say update at the end of the day, or you can go through and have them update manually. So that way you can just do that, or you could bounce the switch ports, meaning just shut off the switch port they're connected to and boot them back up. There's a lot of different ways that you can go and actually manage the auto provisioning capability, but it makes it so much easier if you're dealing really with 3 or more units. If you're dealing with, say, 4, 5, I wouldn't mess around with manually setting them up. I do it all through auto provisioning, just because that'll save you so much time, and you won't have that potential panic that, oh my gosh, I forgot to do the back gate number 2 RFID tag reader, and all of those cards are still going to be active and they shouldn't be active. Oh no, I'm panicking. Whereas if you did it through auto provisioning and you threw that template up on the server, they'll all automatically download that and set themselves up, and you don't have to have that potential panic scenario. So at the end of the day, is RFID access control useful for me and for my situation? Do you have a door? If you do, you could use RFID access control because you're already using some kind of access control. You've probably got a lock on that door, and that lock probably has a key, so you're already using access control. You might bring it into the 21st century and make it a little bit more modern with RFID. It gives you a lot of capabilities. It's not just swapping out that brass key for a piece of plastic. It does give you a lot more capability because a brass key is going to work all the time as long as you've got that key, or an RFID card or a key fob will only work when you want it to work. So it gives you a lot more capability to control that particular entranceway. It also gives you the capability to actually monitor the use of that particular doorway that you wouldn't get from another form of access control. Whereas, say for example, you're using that brass key again, somebody just sticks in that key and opens the door, and unless you got a camera that's watching that particular door and recording that somewhere, or it's got, facial tracking so you can tell who went through that particular door, you'll just know that the door was opened. And you might be able to tell depending on how good that camera is. With an RFID access control unit, especially one from CyberData, we've got a whole list that's built into the unit. So when that card gets scanned, you know exactly whose card was scanned, when it was scanned, and what actions the reader took. So that way you get a detailed list and log of who used that door and when. So if you need to deal with something down the line, say something gets stolen or something disappears, you've got a great list of who entered through that particular doorway to be able to kind of go back and talk to all those different people. And it's pretty easy to set up in comparison to other RFID systems out there. As you saw today, it's a pretty easy step. It's a pretty easy process. You create the master passphrase, you set the name for the user, you set the active times, and you scan your card. And you repeat that process for all your users. So it's literally 3 steps to go and set something up for all your users. Really 3 steps for the first user and then 2 steps for all the others. So it's really easy to go through and set everything up, and they can be very intimidating products, but they're really easy to work with in practice. And of course, if you're dealing with an intercom RFID combination unit, it gives you the best of both worlds, where you've got that RFID access for employees and employees, people that would normally be going through that doorway. They can just scan their card and be on their way. They don't have to interrupt anybody else, say the secretary or security that has to talk to them and then buzz them in with the DTMF code. They can just scan their card and be on their way. It doesn't interrupt anybody else, and they can just get in the door and get straight to work. Whereas it gives your patrons, your clients, or that, the friendly neighborhood UPS guy, they can press that call button on the intercom and still have that full duplex communication. So one of these units gives that capability for the kind of advanced access control of RFID, where your regular employees can scan their card and be on their way, and your visitors can interact with the intercom and go through that usual practice. And you don't have to have, say, 2 different cat drops for that. You don't need 2 network cables to be able to have an RFID tag reader and an intercom. You can do an all-in-one unit. And it gives you the capability, again, to, kind of issue RFID cards for employees and intercom for patrons. So it's really, again, the best of both worlds. RFID access control is something that everybody could use. They might not think they need it, but it's really, really useful and a lot more advanced than just your regular brass key. So finally, like I like to do, I want to go over an index of terms and stuff that we use today. We did throw around a couple different terms and things that might not be known by everybody. So we'll start with RFID, which is just radio frequency identification. Everybody works with that. They've heard the term, but they might not know what it means. Then we've got a key card, which is just a physical card that's used for access, not something that you say like scan through a reader, with like those magnetic strips. You just hold it up against the reader, and the same thing goes for the key fob, which is basically a different option when you're dealing with one of these RFID cards. You can get a nice little physical card, say like you'll get at a hotel or something if you go to a hotel, or you can get basically a keychain that you can use for the same thing. So you've got that kind of capability and flexibility depending on what you want for your business. Then we only briefly threw it around, but the term H.264 is the video codec that's used to send video calls in the SIP world. It's widely used across the internet and a lot of other protocols, but mainly in telephony, it's used for video calls. Passphrase is just used as a seed to generate the random key for the cards, and again, this is basically just helps generate the randomness when it's creating these random numbers that are actually used and read from the card. And then finally, DSR, which is kind of a proprietary term that we use, and that's our door strike relay accessory, and that's just an accessory that you can utilize for, say, higher power door strikes or mag locks, or basically different things that can actually actuate and control the access through that entranceway, that gate, or what have you.
Thank you for watching this edition of CyberSchool. If you have any questions, please get in contact with our sales department. They are available by email at sales@cyberdata.net or by phone at 831-373-2601 extension 334. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this from CyberData.